Welcome to the Empathy Avengers podcast, where we put empathy into action.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Empathy Avengers podcast. Today, we are honored to have one of my favorite people, Jen Senko, with us. She is an award-winning documentarian. She created The Brainwashing of My Dad, which tells the story of how her dad becomes radicalized and how they dealt with it with empathy. Welcome, Jen.
Thank you. I came out with a book of the same name in 21, and it's more updated. So just wanted to mention the book.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to get into the content in both the movie and the book. I was impressed with your documentary because not only did you tell a personal story with your dad, but you went deep into the cause of his brainwashing and so many others. It was so helpful and useful to recognize these same situations in their own family members and loved ones. Start with walking us through that transformation you witnessed in your dad and the early signs that stimulated you to start documenting it in a film.
Sure. First, I'll tell you a little bit how he was so you can see the drama of the transformation. Growing up, my dad was a wacky, fun guy. He was a World War II vet, medic in the war. He grew up dirt poor, but thanks to the GI Bill, he got his master's in engineering. He loved animals and could always be counted on to urge my mom to let us have just one more pet. He was a child's dream dad. All the kids in the neighborhood loved him because he could burp full sentences, which was very amusing. He loved talking to people, especially with accents, because he knew 5 languages. He'd grown up speaking English, Ukrainian, and Polish. When he went to war, he just picked up languages. He highly valued education and paid for all of us to go to college. He was live and let live, non-political Kennedy, FDR, Democrat, non-judgmental. In fact, one time when my parents took us to New York City, we came across a homeless black man, asked my dad for change. My dad called him sir, chatted and gave him money. That was who he was. My dad wore crazy clothes like a hippie before there were hippies. He was an early environmentalist. Waste not, want not. Don't run the water. Turn off the lights. Don't run the AC. Don't throw food out. Don't waste the toothpaste. This dramatically changed 180 degrees once he retired. He got a part-time job, long commute, started listening to talk radio. Bob Grant at the time, the father of conservative media. His personality started to change. He became cranky and serious. When I'd visit from New York, he'd pick me up at the bus station at this radio blasting. And if I tried to say something, he'd shush me and tell me I should listen and maybe learn something. Little by little became super critical of Democrats. The rest of us were normal Democrats. When he fully retired, he stopped eating lunch with my mom, isolated himself in the kitchen, and would listen to Rush Limbaugh for 3 hours a day. My mom had him build heavy doors on the kitchen so she could be in the living room and not listen to Limbaugh, who was not nice, ate in peace and watch her own news. He'd rail against and was obsessed with Bill Clinton, who my mom and I liked at the time. And we'd beg him not to because it would turn into heated arguments. He became a bully.
That does sound like a radical difference from a man who is kind to animals and homeless people on the street.
Yeah, it did affect our family and my relationship with him. My parents agreed not to discuss politics. But when emailing came in, he got on that email train and belonged to every single Democratic email group, send us up to 5 to 10 emails a day. They were all really hateful against Democrats. He actually disowned me because I had joined a dating site and I said, no Republicans, please. I learned not to like them because all they did was rail against Clinton, women, Black people, poor people, environmentalists. I was an environmentalist, the minimum wage, client deregulation. It became obvious these Republicans had engaged in a psychological hit job against Democrats. We begged my dad to stop sending emails, but he didn't. So me and my brothers stopped, but my mom kept up and learned to research, find facts, and him well-sourced arguments back. They'd be in the same room. They'd get up and not say a word about it.
How did they stay married?
They almost didn't. Family get-togethers were strained and there were no normal conversations. They all came back to politics. You couldn't even talk about the weather because then he would launch into global warming. That's bullshit. So finally, in answer to your question, my 80-something-year-old mother emailed me and said, Jennifer, how can I get an apartment on my own? Oh. And that was really sad. That's when I determined I have to do this documentary. I need to document this change, number one. And then number two, I needed to document what the fuck was happening. There was some kind of psyop going on. I wasn't familiar with that word at the time, but I knew something was going on.
I think that's why I love you so much, Jen.
I love you.
Yeah. I was your dad. I was trapped in that world. And like Pamela said, it is a world filled with hatred and fear. I experienced cognitive dissonance as physical pain.
It almost destroyed our family because my brothers didn't want to have anything to do with him. He was a big pain in the ass and just this nasty, obsessed person. Even some of my cousins and relatives were like, whoa, this is too much. It was a very sad, traumatic time.
You started on the journey to document what was going on with your filmmaking, and I guess you did some research yourself. What kinds of things did you discover to tease a bit about the film and the book?
Within the context of history, that's so important. Republican pushback started after FDR. The first political consultants were in 1934 after FDR. Clem Whitaker and Leon Baxter. They were hired by corporations to develop strategies to defeat popular bills like universal health care was described as socialized medicine that would put us on a slippery slope. Other tactics they use, which Republicans today use, are to pretend to be the voice of the people and constantly attack, relentless attack. The right-wing Republicans or libertarian Republicans were desperate, especially after 1954 Brown versus Board of Education. After Johnson lost Goldwater in a landslide in 1964 because he was associated with the Birch Society and they were considered nutty, wanted to do everything back then that the Republicans are doing today. People were like, what? So they created watchdogs to push back against media they decided was liberal media. This laid the groundwork for right-wing media. After Reagan got rid of the Fairness Doctrine in 1980, one of the most divisive figures in American media history, Rush Limbaugh, went national the following year. He was on 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. He would tell his audience on Friday, don't think about anything until Monday. I'll tell you what to think. I'll tell you how to interpret everything. He promoted racism, misogyny. He was anti-LGBTQ. My dad had loved my gay friends. He was like, oh, they're so cultured and sophisticated, until Rush Limbaugh got a hold of it. Limbaugh was also a defender for the overdog. Like, he would defend the big tobacco companies. He promoted conspiracy theories, blaming Democrats or liberals for America's ills. The allure of Limbaugh's and Bob Grant's, that they tapped into a kind of resentment, an insecurity, mostly middle-aged and aging white men. It was a kind of injured pride that others are surpassing them, taking over what was once their domain. A lot of older white men were totally devoted to Limbaugh. My dad, a friend, and just crushed on Rush Limbaugh. They would meet at McDonald's and go, did you hear what Rush said last night? They had big old man crushes. Limbaugh passed himself off as one of them. And he created and nursed non-rich white male grievance and resentment towards poor people, dark people, gay people, women, and liberals. It was a hierarchy that was threatened, a white male hierarchy. The loss of their station was these guys' fall. Came Fox News. Roger Ailes was hired by Murdoch to put together Fox News. He believed that they could convert viewers to the GOP with a pretend news channel. He said, people are lazy and want their thinking done for them. He thought 59% rely primarily on TV. Murdoch consistently used the framing of us versus them, the major propaganda technique. They preyed on and created grievance. Their mission was to blame Democrats and liberals for rigging the system against real Americans. They used fear, emotion, and doubt, whipped their audience into a frenzy. The audience was filled with fear and doubt. The primitive part of the brain, the amygdala, gets triggered. That's our fight or flight mechanism. When that happens, rational thinking goes out the window. You're reacting from fight or flight mode. What we found is they turn into fight mode, and newscasters on Fox would often engage in theater of anger. It makes them seem like they're telling the truth and empathetic. That becomes tribal. You belong to a special group who understands how we're all being fucked over, and gives an explanation of how it's the Democrats' fault and Republicans are fighting for you. This tribal thing is groupthink. They're now part of a community. Humans need community. That's how they survived. Most people adapt to the beliefs of their group because that makes them feel safer if they believe what others in their group think. And then repetition is key. Lies are repeated ad nauseum across the right-wing information silo. People embrace that which sounds familiar because there's a glitch in our brains that registers what we've heard many times before as truth. Accuse Democrats of what they're guilty of. It would just sound ridiculous if they're framing it first, if Democrats are like, no, you are, but what am I? It loses its punch and confuses people.
It's projecting. That's what they do all the time. And yes, the whole the lock her up stuff.
Yeah.
The big lie, the election fraud.
It's a tactic. It's a technique. They've studied these people in the past. Dr. Kathleen Taylor, brainwashing expert from Oxford, describes 5 important factors involved in creating this belief change. Isolation. They're told the only truth tellers are them, and all the others are fake news. They now control what goes into the brain since they isolated them. Uncertainty. The person's like, wow, that's not what I think or what I know or learned. They attack former beliefs, a strong emotion. It's more interesting than plain facts. People tend to mirror what they're seeing. Those are some of the tactics.
I found it interesting after I got out that people are hesitant to use words like brainwashing and cult. And I don't understand why you don't call it what it is. Were you ever hesitant to use that word, or did you just call it what it was? Complete bullshit.
I got a lot of pushback for using that word. From the very beginning, I've often thought about the title for this documentary. I knew I wanted to make it the brainwashing of my dad because that's what it felt like. We got a lot from Kickstarters, backers, and they didn't object. But when I did get one backer, gave us the money needed for the film, it was like, I don't think you should use brainwashing. I said I wasn't compromising it because to me, that's what is going to make other people feel that's what happened to my dad or my husband. They were going to relate with that. And that's what it felt like. And I wanted to bet there was such a thing as brainwashing. That's why I sought out Dr. Kathleen Taylor.
And you had other family members of victims in the film.
Yeah.
To their experiences.
Yeah. Once word got out, people were coming from all over. So I said, I got to interview all these people to show this is a phenomenon.
Yeah.
Nobody was doing it at the time, but I thought, fuck it, I'll use Skype and have a camera behind me and shoot the Skype because I have to get these people and I don't have the budget to travel.
It was effective. You got the right number of sound bites to give that sampling of people that have also had these experiences with their family members to validate your experience with your dad. But I mean, it's a phenomenon. We've seen the Overton window has shifted and people are now accepting things they didn't used to. More bullies, assholes, and not as empathetic, which is why we're avenging that with the Empathy Avengers. It seemed to be tied to this propaganda war coming from Russia, and war tactics have been adopted by Americans that are just out to brainwash us.
Yeah. What you said about the Overton window, the way people looked at the Birch Society back then shows how far they come. Goldwater was slaughtered in that election because he sided with the Birch Society. People are accepting violence more. Television and movies have contributed to that. I remember when it started in the 70s with, I forget the name of the actor, but somebody killed his family and he was out for revenge. There's a new genre that's going to start, and people, they're going to be going for that excitement, anger, justification, violence. And then once that Overton window moved in the direction of accepting violence, it just kept being pushed more and more and more. I can't help but think people are a little immune to violence because on television and movies is made out to be so normal. Like, oh, he's dead. A character in a movie. Oh, his head got cut off. Too bad.
Well, it's real life. There are more arms in America than there are people. This crazy gun violence epidemic we are somehow surviving through. We've got shootings. Everybody has guns and a rhetoric. People talking about violence and using those terms. It's amazing how many words like I shot my shot or violent words adopted into regular rhetoric.
Even
or you get a target in your sights. These are ambitious goals.
media is to blame because they gloss over things so quickly. Just last month, a Speaker of the House in Minnesota, her husband and their dog were murdered. And I watch a lot of news, and the headlines for 3 or 4 days, and then the media was on to the next headline.
Can you imagine if that happened in the 70s? What you were saying, Pam, about the proliferation of guns. I remember talking to a conservative guy at the rally. He was photographing it and said, Democrats want to take away our guns. I said, no, they don't. That is being pushed by the right to sell more guns, have guns become a rallying cry. They're taking away our freedom. He said, oh, it is? I said, yeah. Rachel Maddow even did a segment on that. She went around asking people, I think it was in Alaska, and they were like, Democrats want to take our guns. Nobody actually suggested that. The conspiracy theory was that Clinton was going to come and take their guns and put people who disagreed with them in dissident camps. There's projection too, because that's putting
That's
people in
separate.
camp.
Yeah.
How did you see the propaganda erode the person you love so much and the good in him, his empathy?
For one thing, my father had been a bleeding heart for animals, and I was shocked, freaked out actually, when he sent me something in the mail, and I had used a PETA label. He had a black marker and rubbed out the logo PETA. It was like he scribbled over it, and it was like something out of The Shining. He had always been an animal lover, and even one time started an argument with me about animal testing, which he knew I was against. I was trying to tell him there are better alternatives because many animals are not the same. The test was done on rabbits and it didn't work on people. I was realizing there was nothing left of his original personality. It was as if he was a cult member. And then another really disturbing thing, he hated illegal aliens, quote unquote, illegal aliens, AKA most Mexican looking people. He used to love talking to anybody foreign because he was so good at languages. But when he'd see Hispanic people, he'd assume they were illegal aliens and use a derogatory term. I'm mortified to say once when my mom, father, and younger brother visited me in New York, we were crossing the street and we saw some Hispanic restaurant workers. I heard him tell my brother, there goes a couple of, I won't even say it. He thought I wasn't within earshot. I was mortified. It was his attempt to spread hate, much like an evangelical, right? Not
Yeah.
Christianity. It was this hate. Make sure he could influence my brother, hate them too.
Yeah. I dated an alcoholic in college, always buying everybody shots, but he wanted everybody drunk like him. And I feel like it's the same kind of thing. This is fantastic. This is so illuminating. Thank you, Jen. I wanted to get into some hope. Were there any approaches you and your mom tried to implement on your dad that worked, or some that didn't work that you want to share with us today?
This one time, I worked for financial institutions, merge or do these purges and lay off lots of people from our group because they didn't understand what we did. This one layoff was during a recession, so I had been out of work for a while on unemployment, which my dad didn't criticize. They had run out of Cobra and had to find health insurance. I was visiting and thinking about how stressful it was looking for insurance. I had created a table with different insurance companies and looking at it. It's horrible. This is before the Affordable Care Act. My dad came in and I started to talk to him about the difficulties, all the hurdles and hours of research just to find health insurance. It wasn't a political conversation. It was just personal. He was very sympathetic as my dad. At the end of my story, my dad said, there should be something like universal health care or cheap government health insurance. I was grateful that I had that support and sympathy from my dad. So I learned that if a point was shared as a story, especially a personal one, He was more apt to think rationally and thoughtfully, not as programmed and not defensively or with no cognitive dissonance.
Which is why bringing his story and your story to everybody in the film, book, and podcast is important, because other people hear this, watch the film, and see their own experiences in your dad's story. Some already know their family member's been brainwashed, but others are maybe kind of brainwashed themselves and start to see cognitive dissonance that has been plaguing many people.
Yeah.
People who have lost loved ones recognize, like you did, that something has switched to a 180. Somebody previously happy and kind has become very angry, very fearful that they're going to lose their place in this world. They're under attack, being persecuted. So I'd love to know, how did you counteract that anger, that fear feeding into him every day?
Here's the rest of the story. My parents moved to a senior community, and somehow in that move, his radio broke. He put it in the garage, intending to fix it. No Rush Limbaugh lunches. And he chilled a little. My parents started enjoying lunch together again. Still got the email and snail mail and watched Fox in the afternoon. A couple months after, their old TV in the kitchen conked out and they got a new one. My mother programmed the remotes. She loved programming remotes. He didn't bother trying to figure out how to get Fox. Just watched the news she had on. He was getting more agreeable and even sending less emails. A few months later, he was in the hospital for a week. They had old computers. She said, "Jennifer, will you kill some of Daddy's emails?" I should say delete. No more violent language.
No more violent rhetoric. Yes.
Would you delete some of Daddy's emails? I attempted, and I said, "Mom, they just keep coming." He subscribed to them. One day I discovered her at his computer. She had decided to unsubscribe him from some of the worst. Then she got the idea of subscribing him to more liberal and democratic ones. When he got back, he read them both. He admitted, "I'm not all Democrat, I'm not all Republican." My mother asked, "What do you think of gay people getting married?" "If that's what they want to do, let them get married." And he was that's how he used to be. He ended up voting for Obama. He's doing a good job.
You didn't know the ending of the film when you set out because you were documenting the downfall, but the fact that it was reversible is refreshing.
My friend Jim Stewart says the only way to help someone out of a cult is to remove the source of brainwashing.
Yes.
Your mom did that.
Yeah.
Sabotage your family's computers and radios. No,
that's
but reverse brainwashing, removing the negative sources and giving the good messages to counterbalance is really
Then he came to his own conclusion. He saw both and ended up being more liberal than not.
I think it's easy if you only hear one side of the story to believe the one side.
It could happen to any one of us. We're not special. If we're put into a brainwashing camp, when that's all we hear, 5 days a week, our brain is going to start to change, probably.
Absolutely.
With Mindy.
When I was in the Quanon Church in Texas, almost everyone I spoke with, their news sources were Facebook, church, or Fox. And that was it. They kept Christian music playing 24/7 in their homes and cars. They are totally in this information silo. Doesn't feel strong enough. It feels enforced and impenetrable when you're in it. But you saw the cracks for your dad. You saw him being kind to people, even though he was in the Rush Limbaugh anger. So exposing those cracks is essential.
Since you were able to help your dad help himself, what advice do you have for our listeners if they have the same situations with their families?
Number one is getting rid of the source. If you can get away with blocking Fox, OAN, or Newsmax, do it. It's for their mental health and the health of your family. If you can't unsubscribe them, try and subscribe them to other emails. In conversing with them, try not to lose your temper. Exposing their news fake doesn't always help. They'll push back because their self-image is wrapped up in their beliefs and community. Find something you both agree on. A little bit of trust is established. Then that deactivates the amygdala. There are groups that give workshops like hearyourselfthink.org and Smart Politics. There's Stephen Hassan, the cult expert. His books can help you understand how a cult member thinks. You can always just say, look, when they bring up politics, we have different sources of information. We're in two very different worlds. What, in terms of what we think of as truth. You have one truth, I have another truth. So maybe we should understand that and stay away from politics if it makes either one of us angry. Just know it's attributed to different sources of information. There's two different worlds. You're in one world of information, disinformation, and we're in another.
They are more likely to say, I've been lied to than I was wrong. I think maybe many of us expect them to say, I was wrong, you were right all along, you're on the right side of history. But if we want to unify and move forward together as a country, I think we're going to have to do that. There are hard lines. I'm not uniting with racists or January 6th insurrectionists.
When I was growing up in the late 60s and early 70s, you were not supposed to be racist. It was uncool to be racist. Even if somebody was, they weren't going to tout it. Now that's different. The Rush Limbaughs and Fox News people made them racist, even if they weren't. What gets me frustrated is liberals say, oh, they were always that way. No, my father wasn't racist at all, but he became racist. He wasn't against gay people until Rush Limbaugh got a hold of him. Maybe you can crack some of that racism.
A lot of people, like the famous incidents with Dick Cheney, finally liked gay people when his daughter came out. If you don't have diverse experiences and get to know those types of people, you have blinders on. But if you get to know these people are part of your community, your neighbors, and your family, then you are more willing to understand them as people and as equals.
Pam, that makes me think like the importance of a story. I didn't want to just say the right is creating the most massive psyop in American history. If you can explain, I had this neighbor, she lost her job because they downsized and she didn't have health insurance. She had to go on welfare, but they said, no, you have to work.
If your dad heard about somebody struggling to get health care because their COBRA had run out and they had been unemployed for however many months, and if he didn't know that it was you, he might have, oh, they're lazy, rah, rah, rah. You know, like it's his daughter who he loves, and he has seen you struggling, trying to figure this out. That makes it more real for him, and he's able to be more empathetic.
Jen, how can we rebuild empathy in our communities and our conversations?
Yeah, I live in a red senior community. Seniors all around me. They have their American flags. I'm very friendly to them. I grow a garden and offering them tomatoes or peppers. They know me as a nice person. I have a sign on my car that says Fox flatlines your brain. Right next to the American flag, a pride flag. And then I have a statue of the Virgin Mother because one lady died and just throwing it out. I don't want to see her thrown out. There she is. And it looks like an Italian grotto. Really cool. I find we can agree on and have some of the same values and don't even realize because they're full of misconception about the Democrats. The main thing you need in order to have empathy is to understand the propaganda they get intentionally is lying to them in order to divide us. Too many dismiss them as stupid or assholes, but not necessarily. Research suggests if we want to end autocracy, when 3.5% of the population engages in peaceful resistance and protests, it can disrupt the status quo and gain sympathy from other than organization and strategic leadership.
And
It's not just making a statement and showing leaders we're not happy and that we want them to shape up, or GTFO in the case of the Orange Man. Being there in solidarity with other regular American citizens, frustrated and mortified and afraid, and it felt really powerful.
Yeah.
So Jen, let's end on a high note. We can bring empathy back to society.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. Like, I see on Facebook when I keep my temper and answer a couple of my right-winger Facebook friends who post outrageous things. If I'm polite and answer with a lot of factual detail, they half the time back off and read what I say. It's a lot of work, but I try to do it when I can. It's worth doing. The greatest example of hope for me is the story of my dad. You take away the poison and the mind heals. The Democratic Party tragically underestimates the role of right-wing media. This right-wing media machine, the oligarchic party created. Sue Wilson mentioned that maybe Democrats during a campaign should buy a few cheap AM radio stations to counteract lies and the conspiracy theories. Now, I don't have any illusions. This will be difficult and take time and empathy to.
That's why we're the Empathy Avengers.
Yay!
thank you, Jen, for your advice, sharing your experience with your precious dad. It gives hope and practical steps that we can all take to connect our loved ones that have been lost. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for the Empathy Avengers podcast, where kindness is your superpower and empathy saves the day.
The Empathy Avengers, where we put empathy into action.